The insistent chirping of his alarm clock dragged Daniel from a restless sleep. 7:30 a.m., Monday. He squinted at the clock, his head throbbing with the remnants of last night's escape. He knew he should get up, get ready for work, but a heavier feeling kept him anchored to the bed. The thought of facing the day, facing his colleagues, facing himself felt insurmountable. He reached for the orange prescription bottle on his nightstand, his fingers ghosting over the label, aripiprazole 30 milligrams. He knew he should take it, knew it helped keep the shadows at bay, but today the pull of oblivion felt stronger. He tossed the bottle back onto the nightstand, a silent act of defiance. Today he would face the world on his own terms. He stumbled out of bed, the room tilting slightly. He could feel the walls around him breathing with him as he took each breath. The familiar disarray of his apartment greeted him. Clothes strewn across the floor, empty beer bottles on the counter, a lingering scent of stale takeout. He walked over to a dusty picture frame on his dresser. It was Rachel. Her vibrant smile, frozen in time, mocked him with its lost joy. He could almost hear her laughter echoing in the silence of his apartment. His chest ached with a familiar pang of guilt. He missed her, but it was his fault he drove her away. He picked up the picture frame, his fingers tracing the outline of her face. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," he whispered, his voice raspy with unshed tears. He set the picture down, the weight of his grief settling heavily in his stomach. A soft whimper from the corner of the room caught his attention. Plato, his husky, lay curled up on his dog bed, his tail thumping weakly against the floor. He looked at Daniel with sad, knowing eyes, the only witness to his unraveling, a silent companion. He stumbled into the kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath his bare feet. He grabbed a loaf of bread from the counter, the plastic bag crinkling in the silence. He popped 2 slices into the toaster, the mechanical whirring jarring in the quiet apartment. His reflection in the stainless steel toaster oven stared back at him, hollow-eyed and unshaven. He looked away, disgusted. He pulled the toast from the toaster, the smell of burning bread filling the air. As he reached for a knife, he noticed something on his fingers. A sticky, crimson smear. Blood. There was blood everywhere. He stared at it for a moment, his mind struggling to process the sight. Panic surged through him. Where had it come from? He rushed to the bathroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He flipped on the light switch, the fluorescent light illuminating the grimy tiles and the chipped porcelain sink. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. His face, usually pale, was now flushed, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked closer, examining his hands. The blood was gone. He ran his fingers through his hair, his scalp tingling. Had he imagined it? A wave of dizziness washed over him and he gripped the edge of the sink for support. His reflection in the mirror seemed to distort, his own face morphing into something grotesque and unfamiliar. The eyes, no longer his own, stared back at him with a chilling intensity. He could have sworn he heard a voice, a low, guttural growl, whispering his name. He stumbled back from the mirror, his chest constricting with fear. He needed to get out of there. He needed to escape the accusing eyes, the whispering voices. He needed something. He grabbed his keys from the counter and headed out the door, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He got into his car, the interior smelling of stale cigarettes and fast food. He turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtering to life. As he pulled out of his driveway, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing across the street, shrouded in shadow. He blinked, and it was gone. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of paranoia. He needed a drink. He needed to numb the fear, the confusion, the gnawing emptiness that had taken root in his soul. He drove aimlessly, the familiar streets of his town blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. Traffic lights blinked red and green, a meaningless code he could no longer decipher. The world outside his car seemed distant, muffled, as if separated by a pane of glass. He felt himself drifting, his grip on reality slipping with every passing block. That'll be $22.50. He pulled into the parking lot of a liquor store, the neon sign buzzing a harsh welcome. He stumbled out of his car, his legs unsteady beneath him. He entered the store, the cool air conditioning a shock to his system. Rows of brightly colored bottles lined the shelves, promising temporary oblivion. He grabbed the first bottle of whiskey he saw, the amber liquid sloshing inside the glass. He walked to the counter, his hand trembling as he placed the bottle down. The cashier, a teenage girl with bored eyes and a bored expression, rang him up. He avoided her gaze, ashamed of his disheveled appearance, the desperation clinging to him like a bad smell. She handed him his change, her fingers brushing against his. He flinched, as if burned. He mumbled a thank you and fled the store, clutching the bottle of whiskey like a lifeline. Back in the confines of his car, he twisted open the bottle and brought it to his lips. The harsh liquor burned a trail down his throat, momentarily silencing the whispers in his head. He took another swig and then another, each gulp pushing him further down the rabbit hole of self-destruction. He knew it wouldn't bring Rachel back. He knew it wouldn't erase the pain, the guilt, the crushing weight of his unraveling mind. But for now, it was the only solace he could find. As the day wore on, he continued to drink, each sip blurring the edges of reality a little more. He tried to distract himself, turning on the radio, but the voices of the announcers morphed into mocking laughter, accusing him, judging him. He slammed his hand against the dashboard, the sudden noise momentarily silencing the cacophony in his head. He reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling with the buttons. He had to talk to someone. He had to tell someone what he had done, what he was seeing, what he was hearing. He scrolled through his contacts, his eyes landing on a familiar name, Rachel. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button. He longed to hear her voice, to imagine just for a moment that everything was all right. But deep down, he knew it was a futile hope. He closed his eyes, the memory of her last phone call flashing before his eyes. The disappointment in her voice, the resignation, the fear. He had pushed her away, driven her away with his erratic behavior, his paranoia, his inability to control the demons clawing at his sanity. He had promised her things would change, that he would get better. But his promises had rung hollow. He had failed her. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat, the sudden movement sending a fresh wave of nausea through him. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, his body racked with tremors. The world outside his car had dissolved into a swirling vortex of shadows and shapes, the streetlights casting long, distorted figures on the pavement. He could hear whispers all around him, accusing voices slithering through the cracks of his sanity. They hissed his name, taunting him, reminding him of his failures, his guilt, his descent into madness. He was trapped in a waking nightmare, his mind a prison of his own making. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to break free from the suffocating grip of his own mind. But he was paralyzed by fear, by the overwhelming certainty that he was losing his grip on reality, slipping further and further into the abyss. He stumbled back into his apartment, the world tilting precariously around him. He collapsed onto the couch, the empty bottle of whiskey slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the floor. He closed his eyes, seeking oblivion in the depths of unconsciousness. But even sleep offered no escape from the torment. He dreamt of Rachel, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and accusation. She stood beside a shadowy figure, its features obscured by darkness. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices echoing strangely in the dreamscape. He strained to hear their words, his heart pounding in his chest. "He's not ready," the shadowy figure hissed, its voice a low growl that sent shivers down his spine. "He's too far gone. Todd will be disappointed." Rachel reached out a hand, her touch cold as ice. He wanted to recoil, to escape her touch, but he was rooted to the spot, trapped in the suffocating grip of the nightmare. He woke with a start, his body bathed in sweat, his heart racing. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. He lay there for a moment, his mind struggling to separate dream from reality. The events of the previous day washed over him in a sickening wave. The skipped medication, the blood, the whispers, the phone call he couldn't bring himself to make. He felt a surge of shame, of self-loathing, but it was quickly replaced by a chilling certainty. He was not alone. Something was happening, something dark and sinister, and he was at the center of it. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Tuesday, 3 a.m. He had survived another day. But how many more would there be? He didn't know the answers, but a cold dread settled over him, a premonition that his descent into madness had only just begun. And somewhere, in the shadows, Todd was watching, taunting him.